Hello everybody, Mark here with another episode of Beginner Chess, and today I'm going to be reviewing a game played by my friend Jakob on chess.com. He's relatively new to the game, and thus we're on Beginner Chess. And he played this game when he was rated 941 in Blitz earlier in the year, playing a 10-minute game against Paul Hull, rated 743 at the time. And let's jump right into it. Jakob kicked off with e4. His opponent played e5, knight c3, indicating the Vienna game, knight f6, and b3 from Jakob here. I'm not sure how much theory Jakob knows. I haven't really spoken to him about this game, but b3 isn't really in the spirit of the position. When you're playing the Vienna game, you're looking for a bishop on, say something like this, a variation where bishop c4, bishop c5, d3, knight c6, and either knight f3 or f4, really looking for a kingside expansion. One of the things I've learnt probably in the last year is a lot about imbalances and how to make plans based on those imbalances. Right now, White's pawn structure is pointing at the kingside, and this indicates that's where he has the most space. And where you have the most space is where you want to be attacking. If anything, just go by that simple idea. You attack where you have space, and your pawn structure indicates where you have space. So these pawns are all pointing at the kingside, so we should be attacking on the kingside with ideas like f4 and then knight f3 afterwards. So that's just the idea of the position, and in this position, White's bishop doesn't really need to be developed, at least not for a while. It's already covering all of these squares along this diagonal, and so you don't really need to develop it. You can focus on pushing that f-pawn, developing that g1 knight, getting castled, that sort of thing. But instead b3, okay, bishop c5, bishop b2, d6, and d3 here from Jakob. Not sure how far ahead Jakob saw, but this allows a little bit of complication for black to throw into the mix here. After d3, there is knight g4, hitting on the f2 pawn. The only way to defend that is knight h3, which was played. And it just gets a little bit complicated here for White. An easier way to play after d6 is simply to play h3, taking a tempo out to defend g4 so that either after you develop your knight to f3, a bishop can't pin it, and that the knight simply can't use the square g4. It's a very simple way to defend, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Another idea is knight f3, and if knight g4, d4. To play this line, you have to understand that, and you have to be willing to give up a pawn temporarily to blunt this bishop's influence on f2. So after e takes d4, the bishop can no longer see the f2 pawn, so you can take a tempo out and play knight a4, hitting the bishop, trading it off whenever that bishop influences f2 again, or simply trading it off straight away and recovering your pawn on d4 with variations such as knight c6. You would play bishop b5 to pin the knight, stop it, defending the d4 pawn. Now we have the knight is no longer defending d4, so we have two attackers, and black only has one defender. So a6 to kick our bishop. Bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, and in this position you can either take on d4 or simply just castle and take on d4 later. Needless to say, this is an interesting position in its own right, but it also helps White's development happen much quicker and more fluently. But anyway, Jakob played d3, as we talked about. And now you'll notice, though, after the bishop has been developed to b2, rather than still being on c1, this diagonal is not as useful anymore. Okay, the bishop's no longer influencing it, so it's actually not so useful to have your pawns all on light squares, and this bishop's kind of, yeah, not great. I'm actually going to give that a red color square. It's not so good in this position. But anyway, after d3, knight g4 was played, knight h3 was forced to defend, and queen f6 from black. Now this is not a good move. It's bringing the queen out too early for harassment. Yes, it's piling up pressure on f2, and yes, Jakob may not have played in the most accurate manner, but it's still not, just in theory, it's just strategically, it's not a good idea to bring out your queen so early when you have 2 minor pieces on the back rank, still undeveloped, you're uncastled. It's just, a mating attack this early is not going to happen if the player you're playing against is able to defend easily. I mean, Jakob played queen e2, which was very simple defense, and black had no attack. But there was an even stronger move for white in this position after queen f6, and that was knight d5. Now, knight d5 does a few things. Obviously, it threatens the queen on f6, but it also threatens this c7 pawn, forking the king and rook, which is quite a dangerous threat. And the best move here for black is to simply drop the queen back to d8. It's absolutely best. Defends both threats. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for my friend Jakob, in this position, his opponent probably would have done something like bishop takes f2, and then if the knight recaptures, then we have queen f2 mate, which is not desirable. But simply after bishop f2, king e2, simple chess. There is no more checks for black. His queen is hanging. The c7 pawn is under attack. If his queen moves back to d8 now, his bishop will hang. It's just not a good position for black, because black's actually lost here. If queen h4 to defend the bishop, not only does white have this check on c7 eventually winning black's rook, but he simply has g3 here, breaking the communication between the queen and bishop, allowing, or forcing really, bishop takes g3, h takes g3, and queen takes g3. Now black has 3 pawns for the minor piece. However, it is white's turn to move, and after a tempo gainer on the queen, queen h2, and simply king h1, king e1, what can be done about this queen's terrible positioning and this fork that's incoming? Not a lot, and white's got 2 pieces attacking this knight on g4, the rook and the queen, and giving up the rook for 2 minor pieces is absolutely fine and in fact good. So white will be doing that as well if ever, say, king to d7 to stop this knight fork. So anyway, that's just one way to go about it after knight d5. But anyway, Jakob played queen e2, which is fine, defending the pawn. Now black played bishop takes f2. Ooh, this is really showing the skill level down in the sub 1000 rating area. I guess he just didn't notice that the queen was defending f2. Maybe he played this move very quickly and played too fast. Maybe it was a pre-move. I'm really not sure. But after knight takes f2, white is perfectly fine. He's up a minor piece for a pawn, and there is not enough compensation. There is no attack here for black, and black's just losing. But black said, you know what, I'm not losing enough, so I'm going to play knight c6. Which, of course, now that the knight has come from h3 to f2, this knight is attacked twice, and only defended once by this bishop on c8. So the best move here in this position is simply knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, and queen takes g4. And now white's up 2 minor pieces, and even more winning, if it could be possible. So obviously that was best after knight c6. However, Jakob played not winning immediately, but another good move, knight d5 now. It's obviously not best, but it's probably the second best move in this position. Gaining a tempo on the queen, threatening the fork on c7, and he's still got a chance to take the knight. Best move for black in this position is just queen takes f2, getting out of the attack of the knight with tempo. And after these trades, there's no longer a knight hanging on g4, but he's still going to get forked on c7 unless he plays king d8, which would be the best move. But white has a super powerful knight on d5 and is up a minor piece, so it's just a very good position for white. However, after knight d5, another blunder from black. Seems like a few in a row, and this seems to happen a lot in the lower rated games. Knight d4, trying to throw in his own Zhuishenzug against white, attacking white's queen. But it's just not working. There's just too many good moves. Knight takes c7 check, obviously is winning, which is the game continuation, but there was much better in this position. I'll give you a few seconds if you can find it. The simple and completely crushing knight takes f6 check. I don't know whether Jakob didn't play this because he didn't realize it was check or not, but it is, and it's winning the queen for free. And after knight takes f6, you may as well save your knight while you're recapturing against the check. And then simply bishop takes d4, he takes d4, and then white will just open up the position with e5. With his extra queen, he'll win in no time at all with no trouble. But I guess knight takes f6 wasn't seen, so knight takes c7 was played. And another, I feel like this is deja vu, but another blunder from black, king e7. Not only does this not threaten the knight, so white can comfortably play bishop takes d4, removing the threat, and then capture the rook on a8 with his knight. It's allowing another really strong winning move, really, knight d5 check. Now, it's not capturing the queen with check, it's checking and then capturing the queen. This was missed as well in the game. I guess I remember when I was learning chess, once I got my move that I've been trying so hard to get in, which is knight takes c7 check. Once black plays here, all I can think about is removing the threat and then capturing my rook that I've worked so hard to get. Okay, and of course it's winning, and white should go on to win the game. However, when you see a good move, look for a better one. I think William Steinitz, the first world champion, said that. So in this position, knight d5 check is best, winning the queen, obviously. But anyway, bishop takes d4 was played, removing the threat of knight takes queen before, which is important. I'm happy Jakob found it. He played that before capturing the rook. And again here, knight d5 check. Again, this is still on the cards, but Jakob, going for his rook, took on a8. Now, it could be argued that black can play something like bishop e6 or even king d7 to stop this knight from ever getting out and going the exchange down. So perhaps in this position, if you aren't going to play this knight d5 check to pick up the queen rather, perhaps it's best to first play knight takes g4 and win the minor piece for free. A minor piece on its own is better material than winning the exchange. Okay, so trading your knight for a rook is worse than just winning it. Is worse than just winning a knight. A rook is worth 5 points. If you want to look at it this way, a rook is worth 5 points, a knight is worth 3. So 5 minus 3 is 2, so you win 2 points of material. Whereas if you just win a knight, you gain 3 points of material. It's something that I overlooked for a long time, but it's very important to note that a free minor piece is better than winning the exchange. And in this position, black has no time to save his rook because of the threat of knight d5 is still in the air, so it's actually a much stronger continuation. Nevertheless, knight takes a8 was played, knight e5 saving his knight, and Jakob saved his knight immediately, knight c7 with the renewed threat of knight d5 check. This seems like a recurring theme. Queen g5, getting out of that threat of a fork, which is good from black. I don't know whether he did it on purpose, but he did it. Knight h3 attacking the queen. Yeah, it does ruin white's pawn structure after the game continuation of bishop takes h3, g takes h3. But at this point, white's happy to trade down material and go into the end game, just winning. Queen h4 check, queen f2, queen takes f2, king takes f2. This is all pretty natural, so I'm going through it pretty quickly. h5, I don't think this is the time where blacks should be trying to weaken any more squares, but he disagrees, so he plays h5. Rook g1 from Jakob, a good move, getting your rook on an open file, attacking an undefended pawn. g6, defending the pawn. Knight d5 check, getting his knight back into the game. Good move, centralizing it. That is this knight is a monster. Here on d5 there is no pawns that can come and attack the knight, so this is called an outpost, which knights are best on. King e6. Now I think this is a bit of a mistake. Beginners are always told that in the end game your king is a fighting piece, and to get it into the center because it's a strong piece. That's true, except in positions where there's still mate threats that can happen. The king is not safe on e6. It would be much safer on perhaps, much safer on perhaps d7, or maybe even c8. But in the end, I guess, at this point, you're going to lose anyway, so get your king in the center. Maybe that's what he was thinking, I'm not sure. Jakob played a really sophisticated move in this position. He definitely understood the plan from this point on, and I'm proud to say that he played h4. A relatively deep move. The point of it is to get the bishop on h3 and rake along this diagonal. I mean, that's the reason I see. Perhaps it's to stop g5, I'm not sure, but h4 is a very good move, and so congratulations Jakob for finding it. Knight c6, black's kind of just playing back and forth here. He doesn't really have a plan. Perhaps he's trying to reroute his knight to b4 to threaten both c2 and a2. I'm not sure what the plan is, but Jakob goes ahead with his, forcing continuation of bishop to h3 check, and at this point black is already lost. Black can only play one of two moves, either king e5 or he can play f5 to block. Both are not good, and both are going to lose in very short order. But black decided to go with f5. Rook takes g6, another good move by Jakob. Now the best move here is to play king back to f7 and hold on for a little while longer, but you're not going to last very long after bishop takes f5, and then the rook's going to swing over to g1, and you're just going to get killed. But after f5 and rook takes g6, black played king e5, allowing Jakob to mate him even faster. What a very nice guy black is. And Jakob took his chance. Bishop takes f5 with the threat of rook e6 checkmate. Black didn't see this threat, obviously, or at least didn't see a way to get out of it, so played knight a5. I mean, if you're going to try and get out of it, that's not the best way to do it, even if you don't see it. But anyway, Jakob went ahead and played rook e6 checkmate. However, in this position, black can make it a little more difficult after bishop takes f5 with this threat. Black can make it a little more difficult with knight d8, covering the mating square. And at this point, white has to find another way to mate the king, because the king he's out of squares. There's literally nowhere he can go. These pawns are blocking the king in, and this knight is covering both of these dark square escape routes, and this bishop and pawn are doing a good job of covering all the light squares. So, in this position, white's got to find a new plan. I'll give you maybe 5 seconds or 10 seconds. You can pause the video if you want. Try and find the winning idea for white. Okay, pause the video if you want more time. The winning idea is to move this bishop either to h3 or d7, and basically play rook g5 checkmate. That's the idea, and it's very simple to execute. White plays bishop d7, for example. Bishop h3 is exactly the same thing. Rook f8 check, delaying the inevitable. After king g3, and it's just made in 3 moves at most from this point on. If knight f7 to protect the g5 square, it's simply mate on e6. I'll just put that on the board. The knight was defending that square, so the knight can't move. So after king g3, you can throw in spite checks if you want, but after king takes, it's simply going to be mate in 1. Black can't be stalemated. He's got too many pawn moves. His knight can always move and get mated on e6, so it's just not going to work for him in stalemate. standpoint. So rather than sacrificing the rook, he can play rook f5. And it's important to note not to play either pawn takes or bishop takes here, because it saves the king for an extra move or two. Best move in this position is just rook f1. Very strong. If the rook takes on f1, we have rook g5 check, rook f5 mate. And if the rook doesn't take and black does anything else, let's just say a6, then that's going to be mate as well. So that was the winning idea, basically getting the bishop out of the way, noticing it's still controlling all the light squares, and getting a rook onto the 5th rank to checkmate the king. But just to show the end of the game again, after f5 we had rook takes g6, king e5, bishop takes f5, knight a5, and rook takes rook e8. Rook e6 checkmate. I was rhyming 8 with mate, I assure you. So that's the end of that game. I think overall Jakob played really well as white. He missed a few knight moves early to really take a huge lead in the game, but none of his moves were real crazy blunders. None of them got him into a losing position. I'll quickly run through the game again. e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, b3 was a bit questionable. As we saw, it wasn't really in the spirit of the position. The dark squared bishop is much stronger on the c1, h6 diagonal. Bishop c5, bishop b2, d6. Again, d3 was a bit questionable. As you can see from the colored squares here, the bishop's no longer on c1. It would have been more useful on that diagonal. Knight g4, knight h3 was forced. Queen f6 was a bit of a mistake from black. Queen e2 was played, missing the knight d5 idea, which is a more sophisticated idea, so it's a bit tough to find. Bishop takes f2 blunder, knight takes f2, excuse me. Knight c6, knight d5 now, missing the free piece on g4. Knight d4, knight c7, missing the free queen on f6. King e7, bishop takes d4, which is fine. E takes d4, knight takes e8, missing the free fork that was on d5. So yes, these are blunders from Jakob, except none of them really costed him the game. He was going to be winning in all variations that he went through anyway, so I think it's understandable and okay to be excited, and it is blitz, so I'm not going to hold too much against him. Knight e5, saving his knight. Knight c7, getting his knight back into the game. Queen g5, knight h3, takes, queen h4 check, queen f2, queen takes f2, king takes f2, h5, rook g1, good move, g6, knight d5 check, good move, king e6, not a great move, h4, really good move, very happy he found that. Knight c6, not really doing anything. Bishop h3, a good move. f5, rook takes g6, king e5, a terrible move. Bishop takes f5, a good move. Knight takes a5, and a blundering a mate in one. So that's that game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learnt something out of it. If you like this style of video, just let me know. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback that you can give me to help me improve this series or any of my other videos, please let me know. Thanks heaps for watching.